Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 60. Tales of a Nomad Afloat. Well, back when I started paddling in the late 1990s, the community of paddlers in the southern New Jersey, Philadelphia area had a newsletter that they were printing, kind of in a magazine format. It was called Anorak. And I think, like too many publications, it sort of was put away by the internet and ceased publication sometime few years after that. As far as I know, the catalog of back issues have never been posted online anywhere, but once in a while a copy will show up on an auction table at one of the Kayak USA events, or sometimes a whole pile of them will materialize from the past. And so I started writing articles for this publication, and I'd like to read you one of them from the March-April 2001 issue of Anorak. So this is just a few years after I started paddling. I don't think I knew how to roll yet, but I was really big on the whole folding kayak thing, which I described quite a bit in this article. So here it is. It is called Tales of a Nomad Afloat by capital D initial period Side, S-I-D-E. That's the name I was writing under. All right, so here we go. Folding kayaks. They're not just for air travel. Say what you will about how much faster you think a hard shell is, or how long it takes to put a folding kayak together. There are ample counter-arguments. Rather than view hard shells as the standard for measuring everything else, folding boats can rest on their own unique merits. Consider this. If you arrive at water's edge via plane, train, bus, or cab, and take everything with you in the boat, there is nothing to prevent you from paddling to another destination to take out there. Furthermore, a decision on where to take out doesn't have to be decided in advance. Go with the flow, follow the wind, wander freely. This is the liberating glory of folding kayaking. You never have to arrange a shuttle, and you don't have to come back to where you started. One need only build up a network of eligible access points relatively close to public transportation stops. Part of the fun of this pastime is discovering and adding new put-ins to the repertoire. From where I live in West Philadelphia, I can reach the Delaware River as far upstream as Trenton and as far south as Wilmington via bus, train, and trolley. I can also get to the Rancocas River at Mount Holly, New Jersey, and to sites well inland on Woodbury Creek, Mantua Creek, the Cooper River, and Raccoon Creek. Within that range, a day's excursion is just a matter of playing connect the dots. Every access point has its own unique attributes. There's a Philadelphia site on the Delaware near a large shopping mall where I can land and disassemble the boat while totally concealed in the sloping, overgrown riverbank. I then pop out of the weeds and am halfway across the parking lot headed for the bus stop before anyone, including the patrolling mall security guard, knows where I came from or what I was doing there. In deciding when and where to paddle, every sea kayaker is interested in the wind direction and intensity, height of the tide, and the time the current shifts. The folding kayaker has additional factors to take into account. The peak of rush hour should be avoided. Commuters packed like sardines leave little room for an oversized backpack. Some bus routes don't run on weekends. School hours also become relevant for avoiding an adolescent audience. Remote routes may only have one bus per day, and drivers don't always adhere to published schedules. Whereas using a car and kayak combination means you're tied down to where you parked, my style of folding kayaking favors more of a hit-and-run orientation. And sometimes the emphasis is definitely on run, especially at unfamiliar takeouts. The most vulnerable time for me is when the boat is halfway between together and apart. In that 10 or 15-minute window, I can't walk away from trouble, nor can I evacuate via paddling. I'm all out in the open with no car to use as a personal fortress. I once made the mistake of landing at a little community waterfront park in sight of no less than a dozen kids from the small, tight-knit neighborhood. Now, I've come across entire school field trips in my kayaking travels. However, these young folks were not so benign. They fired questions faster than a machine gun, and once the topics of the boat and the river were exhausted, they started in on personal matters of a crude but precocious nature for preteens. Somehow, I got the feeling that if these kids had been a few years older, they'd have showered me with rocks instead of questions. I got the boat packed as fast as I could, and then a few of them followed me to the bus stop. On the way there, a few others brought the news that someone they knew in a pickup truck wanted to see me. I surmised that this was not an invitation to tea. The bus arrived none too soon. I haven't been back there since. For me, a day's adventure doesn't begin and end at the water's edge. It starts when I walk out the front door and ends when I get home. If I have to, I can walk a mile to the Schuylkill River and get to water without using public transportation at all. Downriver, there's the sprawling Sun Oil Refinery. A great way to start the day because once you pass through there, the scenery can only improve. I used to have a closer spot where Interstate 76 straddles the bank of the Schuylkill. There was an opening beside the highway big enough to walk down into and get to the water. Workers doing bridge repairs used it to run a skiff out to their barge. I took out there a few times until the day they finished the job and bulldozed over the opening with fill dirt. The erosion then created a 12-inch wide slit choked with sticks and trash. Consequently, that location remains on my access grid as emergency use only. I'd have to disassemble the boat in the mud and slime under the roadway, then shove all the boat parts and myself up through the hole. What fun! Some locations work best under cover of darkness. The first time I tried to take out of the Rancocas at Riverside, New Jersey, the western bank looked too steep, muddy, and clogged with lily pads. The east side had a private marina below the bridge, and above it was someone's yard. But I was paddling well after sunset, so I turned off my lights and snuck the boat through the yard. Then I found a patch of grass between the road and the sidewalk, packed the boat, located a bus stop a block away, and was soon gone, leaving nothing but footprints. Many of the New Jersey Transit bus drivers are real characters. They run their buses like rolling cocktail parties, greeting passengers by name and providing nonstop commentary the whole trip. A guy in a paddling jacket with a large pack will provoke friendly inquiries immediately. If I'm not in the mood for explanations, I just say I'm carrying a load of laundry. This is not a false statement. When afloat, I wear everything but the paddle. For real thrills, there's what I call the cold put-in, an untried location that, at least on the map, is close to navigable water. My first visit to the train station at Claymont, Delaware, was a piece of cake. The guy in the little ticket booth couldn't figure out why someone would get off a southbound train and immediately head across to the northbound side, which has no parking lot, just a stretch of woods concealing the mile-wide Delaware. "Where are you going?" he said. "To the river," I replied, and disappeared into the trees. The wide, flat beach at the secluded shoreline made an ideal put-in. Safety note: don't try Claymont with a hard shell. The underground walkway has stairs at right-angle turns. The only other way across the tracks is by stepping into the path of high-speed Amtrak trains that make no distinction between Kevlar and tissue paper. One of my worst ever cold put-ins was trying to do Big Timber Creek from Lindenwold, New Jersey. A surer bet would have been to paddle upstream from the Delaware and just turn around if the creek became impassable, but I was feeling adventurous. On the map, all I had to do was head south from the train station and I'd hit the creek. I planned to paddle clear through to the Delaware and either continue to a Philadelphia takeout or use a Westville, New Jersey bridge where several bus routes cross. As expected, I located the creek south of Lindenwold, where a main street crossed it. Unfortunately, the entire downstream side of the road was fenced off with chain link and barbed wire for 50 yards in either direction. Obviously, trespassers were not welcome. I thought of paddling under the bridge from upstream, but a 10-foot dam lay under one side of the bridge with steep cement borders that left no means to portage around it. My not-too-detailed map showed a likely access point roughly a mile west, so off I went. About half a mile down a road that I assumed ran parallel to the creek, I saw a culvert with about a 4 or 5 foot span of water draining into a dense forest. This had to be a shortcut. All little streams converge into big streams that lead to rivers, right? I put the boat together on the edge of the woods and was soon afloat. About 10 yards downstream, there was a sharp turn at a few tree trunks that were practically growing out of the water. Then the channel siphoned into brush. I got out and pulled the boat under some low branches before getting back in. But I could only paddle another 10 feet before the channel clogged up again. After carrying the boat through swampy weeds to get around the obstruction, there was a hint of better passages ahead. Well, maybe not right ahead, but probably just beyond a few shallow sections, once the multiple trickles all forked back together. At first, I was trying to avoid getting mud and debris all over myself and the boat, but in this terrain, it was hopeless. Having conceived the day's activity as a one-way trip, I felt I could afford to force my way through any obstructions and continue on without looking back. I spent the next hour stuffing the boat through tangled vines, dragging it around impasses, crawling into thorns, wading in muck, and crossing the occasional small pool. My spare paddle, bailing pump, PFD, and VHF radio managed to snag on something every few minutes. All the while, I was expecting a decent stream or the end of a lake to open up just around the next bend. I appeared to be in a valley of lowland puddles, and despite repeated scouting from adjoining hillsides, I couldn't for the life of me find an open channel. I might as well have been Sir John Franklin in 1846, trying to break through the Queen Elizabeth Islands in search of the Northwest Passage. I finally had to concede that I'd been had. Admitting defeat meant disassembling the boat, which I did on a raised ridge, in sight of the first sign of civilization I'd seen since leaving the road, some residential backyards at the top of a hill. My next challenge involved finding a way to get to the street on the other side of the houses. As I continued in the most likely direction, the hill turned into a steep ravine, topped off by yards fenced off to the very edge of the slope. It took another half an hour to find a way out, dragging my pack behind me while stumbling through brush and dodging the poison ivy. In the process, I crossed a low flood basin where the stream I'd originally started following drained into a bog. All visible water seemingly disappeared. So much for my theory on streams becoming rivers. Finally, I straggled back to the train station for an uninspired ride home and decided to call the excursion the Bushwhack to Nowhere. 2 days later, a wide assortment of multi-legged bugs and winged critters still hadn't finished crawling out of my gear. Score one for the swamp gods. But at least me and my trusty feathercraft busted out of that one alive. Too bad Sir John Franklin wasn't able to fold up the HMS Erebus and fit it on a dog sled. Maybe he would have survived his fatal fourth expedition. Notwithstanding ill-fated cold put-ins or wolf packs of little kids, I enjoy using my network of access points in everything from warm, sunny days to rainy nights and icy winter conditions. Disregarding the safety recommendation against paddling alone requires greater caution, well-maintained equipment, and a reliance on the inherent superior stability of folding kayaks, plus the ease of climbing back in without a paddle float. I've experienced no major mishaps after over 100 voyages, though I can't say that everyone I've met thinks what I do is a great idea. In Philadelphia, the Walnut Street Bridge over the Schuylkill River is a good access point as long as the tide isn't too low. On one of my after-dark takeouts there, I negotiated the embankment with the aid of my headlamp and set the boat down by the railroad tracks under the bridge. A rather shabbily dressed man appeared out of the shadows to see what was going on. I began my stock explanation while pulling apart frame pieces and breaking down the boat. "This is a kayak. You may have seen other kayaks before. This one is a bit different because it collapses down. The internal frame is aluminum, though they can be made of wood. It weighs about 35 pounds and fits in this backpack. I got it because I don't have a car. I carry it on the bus." There was a moment's pause as he stood there in the faint stray light of the distant street lamps, steadily eyeing me and the gear spread all over the ground. Finally, he remarked, "Do your people have you in therapy for this?" And as I said, that was published in the March-April 2001 edition of Anorak Newsletter, which has long since ceased publication. And that phrase in there I used about the inherent superior stability of folding kayaks, that was my knowledge at the time, but that was referring to the large doubles like the Klepper kayaks that have a 29-inch beam, which doesn't apply to the kayak I was using, so I would not make the same statement these days. I think when I wrote this, I hadn't learned to roll yet, but maybe by the time it was published, I'd gotten my first rather shaky roll. In regards to the safety of a solo adventure, this particular instance, I never even got to water that was deeper than my knees, so I was quite safe in that regard. Some of the details in that story could be updated. The Sun Oil Refinery has been closed down in Philadelphia, there, which the Schuylkill River goes through there. So I think the plan is to convert that into, I don't know, a park or something else. It's no longer in operation, so it probably smells a bit better now to pass through there. And the Walnut Street Bridge that I described there, believe in Philadelphia, that has been sort of revitalized underneath, and now there's actually a dock or a walkway through there, and they rent kayaks in the summertime, and you don't have to scramble up a tough embankment. You can just walk onto the dock and get up to the shoreline. So it looks a bit different from when I did it back in the day. And I believe that the creek in New Jersey, Big Timber Creek, I can't even find what it looks like where I was going on Google Maps or anything. I think it's all built up with houses since then. Obviously, in this day and age, you could scout the whole thing out with Google Maps, so you wouldn't have to go into it with blind navigation the way I did. I did make reference in there to Sir John Franklin. And in line with my examination of relevant pieces of history in prior Dubcasts, let's check out this guy. Ever since Europeans discovered the American continent and figured out how to sail a ship around the southern end of it, they were figuring there must be a way on the northern end to come through, connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. But northern Canada has all these islands and all this ice and lots of frozen places. And for a couple hundred years, people are poking around up there, but they can't seem to find the fabled Northwest Passage. So in the middle 1800s, a British guy by the name of Sir John Franklin. And so Sir means he was knighted, so he's got some level of achievement at this point. And the extremely abbreviated version of his exploits is he gets command of 2 ships, and he's got a crew of 129 guys, and they depart in 1845, and they never came back. And for years after that, other voyages were sent to go find them, and you can read the history. They've pieced together a good idea what happened, but it seems clear that all his men perished, not all at the same time, but gradually over some number of years. The usual method for exploring in that area was to assume that you're going to get frozen in, because you can only really travel these passages in the summer when they've melted clear. So they would bring, say, 2 or 3 years worth of provisions, figuring we're going to get frozen in and we'll just winter it out and see if it melts enough the next summer. Now, I'm not going to equate my little excursion in New Jersey with an Arctic attempt to connect the Northwest Passage, but you see the parallels there. I'm figuring, this water has got to come out somewhere, and I just have to figure out where the passage is. And they're up there in northern Canada figuring that this got to go somewhere. It's got to come out the other side. We just poke around long enough, we'll find it. And I guess if I was going to use their tactics, I'd figure I'd bring a tent and sleeping bag, and then I'd be, sun goes down, can't see any further. I would just camp there and wake up the next morning and keep on going. But I was always less than half a mile from civilization, as it were, unlike Sir John and his crew. But the aftermath of his disaster does get interesting in that the follow-up expeditions did contact some of the Inuit in the area, who were seen to have some items that they must have come from the ship, and that was the conclusion when they examined them further. And the locals said something like, yeah, these guys were stranded out there and they started eating each other, cannibalism. And when these accounts got back to Britain, they were dismissed as completely false, because Sir John would never stoop that low, nor would his crew, so that couldn't possibly be true. But over the years, more and more clues emerged, and even recently in 2014, the sunken wrecks of both of the expedition's ships were located, and there and from other sources, they have recovered bodies of some of the expedition. Forensic analysis has indicated that they were engaging in cannibalism to survive. So despite the wishful thinking on the part of the Europeans, the Inuit knew what they were talking about. So in the end, history does not give Sir John Franklin all that great a reputation. Unlike some other explorers, for the real heroics and superior leadership ability, check out Ernest Shackleton in Antarctica. That guy knew what he was doing. Okay, I recently came across a video entitled "The Oldest Inuit Footage," or there's a number of videos that use this very old Inuit footage from, I think it's about 1901, and then some of it's later. And some of them it's called "The Oldest Inuit Footage Ever," or various things. But there's one particular. This was done recently. And so there's a soundtrack that goes with it. And the soundtrack is called Inuit Chill, Native American CHILLOUT. And this was put out just last year, 2023. And towards the end of the video, there's this one particular song comes on there that I find rather captivating, haunting melody, you could say. So I looked into it further, and it turns out this was put together by a guy named Al Paton. And he's somewhat like me. This guy, he's in England. He has no genetic relation to Inuit at all, but he's making music using some of these influences. So he took some original samples of Inuit singing, and some of this was from Canada or Alaska or Greenland. So there's throat singing and other forms of singing there, and there's some Greenland stuff. And then he made all his own music to go with it and came up with chord progressions, etc. And it's actually very well done. And the song that I found very intriguing it's called Ummatiga. And that's a familiar word. Ummat is the word for heart in Greenland. So there's actually, I think I've done songs before. There's a band called Ummat. So this is Ummatiga, my heart. And the only information he has about it is that the singer's name was Lek, L-E-Q, which that's not a familiar name, Greenlandic name to me. It might be short for something else. So this album of 12 tracks, you can find that. You can download it, I think. It's Inuit Chill, Native American Chill Out. And like I got to it, you can hear it without buying it. So it doesn't cost you anything, so I would encourage you to do that. But at the same time, I'll give you my attempt to represent something of what it sounds like. So this will be the Dubside version of what Al Paton did with an original recording of an Inuit woman and his own musical additions. Well, I can't say that I'm entirely happy with the way that came out. I could spend another 2 or 3 days on it and probably still not get anything better. So I would encourage you to go listen to the original, at least what Al Paton did. And the original woman singing that is quite something to hear. And he did a very good job of coming up with music to go behind it. So he's calling it Inuit Chill, Native American Chill Out. Al Paton from England. I wrote a number of articles for that Anorak publication over the years. And some of them I recall fondly, but I don't have copies of them. And at that point in time, early 2000s, I was writing not on a computer. And I think some of this stuff was handwritten, and I've lost copies of the originals over the years. I would hope that somebody somewhere has a copy of some of these things, but that's not me. It's my understanding that the Anorak Newsletter publication went through the hands of a number of editors over the years. At one point, Robin Snow, who was the organizer of Delmarva for many years, was doing the Anorak editing. And I think in its final years, it was in the hands of Ray Killen, who I've mentioned before. I am very excited about what I have coming up in episode 61. Might not quite reach the level of groundbreaking, but it's close. Check it out next time on the Dubcast with Dubside.